The bell rang at St. James Academy, its echo rolling down the polished corridors like a signal of both relief and dread. Students spilled from their classrooms, chattering, laughing, shoving backpacks onto their shoulders. But one child remained silent, drifting like a shadow among the noise. Her name was Isabella Carter, daughter of the city's most powerful CEO millionaire, Adrian Carter. She was only 8 years old, but her presence drew whispers everywhere she went. Not because of her wealth, not because of her father's towering reputation, but because she hadn't spoken a single word since she arrived at the academy 3 months ago. Every morning she sat in the front row, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulders, her uniform crisp, her notebooks meticulously organized. Teachers tried everything, gentle questions, encouragement, rewards, but Isabella never answered. She listened, she wrote, she drew, but her lips remained sealed. Some children teased her, others avoided her, whispering rumors about curses and tragedies. The truth was simpler and sadder. Isabella had not spoken since the day her mother died. Adrian Carter, a man whose name carried weight in boardrooms across the world, couldn't solve this problem with money. He had hired doctors, therapists, even private tutors, but Isabella's silence remained unbroken. It was as if her voice had been buried with her mother. And though Adrian rarely admitted weakness, the silence of his daughter cut deeper than any business failure ever could. Into this world stepped Daniel Alvarez, a struggling teacher newly hired by St. James Academy. He was not from wealth or prestige. His shirts were threadbare at the cuffs, his shoes scuffed, and he carried the exhaustion of someone juggling multiple jobs. But his eyes, warm, steady, unpretentious, carried a quiet strength. Daniel had applied for dozens of positions before landing this one, and though the pay barely covered rent in his tiny apartment, he approached the classroom with determination. On his first day, he noticed Isabella immediately. While other children shouted answers and laughed at mistakes, she sat silently, eyes lowered, her pencil moving across the page in small, precise strokes. When he asked her a question, she looked at him with those wide brown eyes that seemed older than her years, then turned back to her paper. Some teachers might have moved on, embarrassed. Daniel did not. He nodded, smiled softly, and said, "That's okay. You don't have to answer today, maybe tomorrow." The children snickered, muttering that Isabella never spoke, but Daniel only continued teaching, his tone calm, never dismissive. He had learned long ago that sometimes silence carried more weight than words. That evening, as he stacked papers on his desk, he noticed a small sketch left behind on Isabella's notebook. It was a drawing of a piano under a beam of sunlight. The detail was striking for a child her age, the keys shaded carefully, the window open to a breeze. He glanced toward the hallway, but she was already gone. He slid the paper into his folder, a flicker of curiosity tugging at his mind. Days turned into weeks, and Isabella's silence remained. But Daniel began noticing the way she watched. She watched him when he read stories aloud, when he wrote equations on the board, when he crouched to tie a student's shoe. Her gaze was steady, as though weighing his every action. Most saw her silence as a barrier, Daniel saw it as a test. One snowy afternoon, during recess, he found her sitting alone on the edge of the playground. The other children shrieked, chasing each other through the snow, but Isabella sat on the steps, sketchbook open on her knees. Daniel approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "That's beautiful," he said gently, pointing to the picture she was drawing, a lighthouse by the sea, its beam cutting through stormy waves. She didn't look up, but her pencil slowed. "My mother loved lighthouses," Daniel continued, lowering himself to sit a few feet away. "She used to say they were proof that even in the darkest storms, someone was shining a light to guide you home." He didn't expect a reply, but her hand trembled slightly on the page. He left it there, respecting her silence, but inside he felt a shift. She was listening. The real breakthrough came unexpectedly. It was music day at the academy, a weekly program where students gathered in the auditorium to sing or play instruments. Isabella sat in the front row as always, her hands folded tightly in her lap. One by one children performed. The sound of flutes squeaking, voices cracking, laughter filling the room. Then a teacher called Isabella's name. A hush fell. Everyone turned. She froze. Her sketchbook slid from her lap onto the floor. The teacher hesitated, embarrassed, and was about to move on when Daniel rose from the back of the auditorium. His voice carried calm authority. "I'll accompany her." Whispers spread like wildfire. The struggling new teacher daring to step into the spotlight with the CEO's silent daughter. Daniel walked to the piano at the edge of the stage, motioning gently for Isabella to follow. She moved slowly, eyes wide, heart pounding. He sat at the keys, his hands poised but relaxed. "I don't know what song you'd like," he murmured softly so only she could hear. "But I'll play something my mother used to hum. If you feel like joining you can. If not, that's okay too." He began to play a simple melody, soft, steady, full of warmth. The notes drifted through the hall, quieting the restless audience. Isabella's fingers curled against her skirt. Her throat ached with words long buried. She closed her eyes, hearing not just the music but the memory of her mother singing by the window on summer evenings. Then, to everyone's astonishment, a sound escaped her lips, a whisper at first, fragile as glass. "You are my sunshine." Gasps rippled through the audience. Daniel didn't falter, he kept playing, his eyes never leaving the keys, giving her space. Her voice grew steadier, trembling but clear, each word rising like a fragile bird taking flight. "My only sunshine, you make me happy, when skies are gray." The children stared, mouths open, teachers blinked in disbelief, and at the back of the hall, a man in a tailored suit gripped the edge of a seat, his chest heaving. Adrian Carter had arrived quietly, intending only to observe, but now he stood frozen, tears burning in his eyes as his daughter's voice, silenced for so long, filled the air. When the song ended, Isabella's hands shook, but her face was transformed. For the first time in months, she smiled. The applause erupted, thundering, but Daniel only offered a small nod, letting her have the moment. She turned, eyes searching, and met her father's gaze. He took a step forward, overwhelmed, but she clutched Daniel's sleeve, as though afraid her voice might vanish again without his steady presence. The silence that had once haunted the academy was gone, broken not by force or wealth, but by patience, kindness, and the quiet courage of a struggling teacher who believed in her. The applause still echoed through the auditorium when Adrian Carter finally found his voice. "Isabella," he whispered, though no one could hear him above the roar. For months he had prayed for this moment, tried everything his fortune could buy, and failed. Yet it was not the doctors or specialists who had reached her. It was a man he didn't even know, a teacher whose shoes looked worn, whose suit was 2 seasons out of date, but whose presence had somehow touched his daughter's soul. Daniel gently rose from the piano bench, resting a hand on Isabella's shoulder. She clung to him for a heartbeat longer, then slowly let go, her small frame trembling from the enormity of what she had just done. Adrian stepped forward, every inch of his powerful figure softened by emotion. His daughter's eyes lifted to him, uncertain, afraid. He crouched to her level, his voice breaking. "You spoke, my sunshine. You spoke." Oh, her lips parted, a small sound forming, but she faltered. Adrian reached out, his hand shaking, as it brushed her cheek. "It's all right, sweetheart, you don't have to say anything more. I heard you. I'll never forget." For the first time in months, he saw the faint curve of her smile. Later that day, when the auditorium emptied and the corridors grew quiet again, Adrian sought out Daniel. He found him in the classroom, stacking papers as though nothing extraordinary had happened. "Mr. Alvarez," Adrian began, his voice carrying the tone of a man used to commanding rooms. Yet now it wavered. "I owe you more than I can ever repay." Daniel looked up, startled, then shook his head quickly. "You owe me nothing, Mr. Carter. Isabella did the hard part. I just played a song." Adrian studied him, unsettled by the humility in his tone. Most men angled for favor, for contracts, for a place in his empire. But this teacher spoke as though saving a child's heart was nothing more than his duty. "No," Adrian said firmly, "you did what I could not. You gave my daughter her voice back." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, unused to praise. "She always had it. She just needed someone to listen differently." Those words lingered in Adrian's mind long after their conversation ended. For a man who had built skyscrapers, brokered billion-dollar deals, and conquered markets, the truth was humbling. He had never been able to simply listen. Over the weeks that followed, Isabella's transformation astonished everyone. She still spoke softly, sparingly, but the silence that once defined her began to lift. She answered questions in class, whispered shyly to friends, even hummed quietly during art projects. Each word was fragile, but each one was a triumph. Daniel never pushed her, never rushed. He simply created spaces where she felt safe enough to try. Adrian began arriving at the academy more often, his sleek black car drawing stares at the curb. At first, teachers braced for criticism or demands. Instead, he sat quietly at the back of classrooms, watching, learning. He saw how Daniel knelt beside struggling students, how he praised effort instead of perfection, how he gave away half his lunch to children who forgot theirs. Adrian saw a world far removed from boardrooms and profits, a world of quiet battles, small victories, and the kind of wealth no fortune could buy. One evening, as snow dusted the city once again, Adrian invited Daniel to his office on the top floor of Carter Enterprises. The view stretched endlessly, lights glittering across the skyline. Adrian poured 2 glasses of water, not wine, a silent gesture of respect. "You could have a different life, you know," Adrian said slowly. "With your talent, your patience, you could train executives, lead programs, command salaries 10 times what you earn now. Why stay in a classroom where no one notices?" Daniel looked out at the city lights, then back at the man across from him. "Because in that classroom I notice. Every child who feels invisible, every voice that's lost, someone has to be there. If I can be that someone, that's enough." Adrian's throat tightened. He had built his empire on numbers and negotiations, but here was a man who measured success in heartbeats and whispered words. For the first time in years, Adrian felt the foundations of his world shift. The change in Isabella was not just in her speech but in her spirit. She began to laugh, a sound so pure it startled even her. She painted pictures of lighthouses and pianos, slipping them into her father's briefcase before he left for work. Adrian displayed them in his office, replacing corporate awards with crayon drawings. Visitors stared confused, but he no longer cared. One night, Adrian returned home late to find Isabella curled on the couch with Daniel, a storybook open between them. She was reading, haltingly, softly, but reading aloud. Adrian stood silently in the doorway, tears blurring his vision. When she finished, she looked up at him, pride glowing in her face. "Did you hear, Daddy? I read it." His voice broke as he knelt beside her. "I heard every word, sweetheart. And I'll never stop listening." The weeks turned to months, and whispers about the CEO's daughter spread across the academy. But the story was no longer about silence. It was about courage, patience, and the teacher who refused to give up. Adrian, once hardened by ambition, found himself transformed. He began funding programs not just for his daughter, but for all children who struggled in silence. Speech therapy, arts initiatives, scholarships for underprivileged teachers. And when asked why, he always said the same thing: because one voice can change everything, if someone is willing to hear it. At the year-end recital, Isabella stood on the stage once again. This time she was not alone. Daniel sat at the piano, Adrian in the front row, his eyes shining. Isabella's voice, though still soft, carried with confidence as she sang the same song she once whispered. "You are my sunshine." But now, it was not just for her mother's memory. It was for her father, for her teacher, and for herself. When the final note faded, the applause was deafening. Adrian rose to his feet, not as a CEO, but as a father whose heart had been healed by the impossible. He looked at Daniel, and their eyes met, a silent acknowledgement of gratitude, respect, and a bond forged not by wealth, but by love for a little girl who had finally found her voice. And as Isabella ran into her father's arms, her laughter ringing clear, the world understood that miracles are not born of power or fortune, but of patience, compassion, and the quiet courage to believe that even silence can one day be broken.